Right. So this interview is about gender identity and how your culture and traditions play into that. But first, interview yourself, introduce
Yeah.
yourself. Thank you.
My name is Thayers Pride. I am a film major and I go to Valencia College.
All right. So, how do you feel about gender?
How I feel about gender. I feel that gender, a lot of times, is something that we assign to people as opposed to something that we let people kind of figure out. And with our culture now, gender roles and everything, particularly, happen to, I don't know. I think like I said, I think we tend to force a lot of stuff on people, regardless of, you know, how they feel, or who they are, or whatever. But,
Yeah. I agree because on social media I see a lot of gender reveal like parties and
Yeah.
everything where people are so excited to
Yeah.
perpetuate that specific gender
Exactly.
assigned at birth. But how do you identify if that's not too much to ask?
I don't know. I think I've never really prescribed to any I guess too strongly with like male perceptions of things. Like I think there's a lot of like male gender roles that you kind of have to fall into, or you're supposed to fall into, that has to do with like toxic masculinity and everything. And I think even as like a kid, I was never about like being like super tough or super like into sports or and then I think during high school when I started like to meet more like trans people and everything, started to learn more about that community, I still thought I was just like, yeah, well, I don't really feel one particular way or the other. So
I agree with that. I think the whole toxic masculinity and, men being manly
Yeah.
men and,
Yeah,
men
like-
not being allowed to cry.
yeah, like I never really prescribed to that, so it just not. And I guess as a kid, you're like forced to subscribe to that, and then when you're not, you kind of looked a different way. And I guess I felt like, oh well, I don't really care about that type of stuff. So what does that make me? But
How did your family feel about gender? Do they subscribe to the more normalized way of life?
I think my mother sometimes, I know she tried to get me into like football and everything, and I remember having to play like sports and stuff growing up. But I think after a while, at least for my dad, he like realized like it's not really suiting me any better to like force him to do stuff he doesn't want to do, or just kind of because like I read books, I played video games, I like watched movies as a kid. I didn't really like go outside too much. I really only went outside to draw, to be honest with you. But I think with stuff like that, my parents never really, or at least for my dad and my stepmom, they didn't really like try to define me to anything. But
That's good. All right. So, are there any traditions or customs or practices in your family or, in general that you don't agree with or?
I think I'll say this, there can be a lot of toxic masculinity in the black community, particularly. I think growing up,
Continue. I was saying stay seated.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was saying that I think like you're supposed to act a certain way and treat women a certain way, and at least for my father, he never really prescribed to that either, and so I didn't really see that much from him. But I think like uncles and cousins and everything, you're like supposed to talk to women like a certain way, you're supposed to look at them a certain way, and I think growing up, I never wanted to make anybody feel uncomfortable, and so I understood like maybe you shouldn't treat women like this way, or maybe you shouldn't like act towards a certain type of people this way. But there's also kind of the whole like I think it's like the matriarchal thing where it's supposed to be the woman takes care of the man and everything, and like she's supposed to cook for him and clean for him and everything. And I think I don't know. I had a single mother growing up, so I was more reliant on myself a little bit. And I think growing up, that kind of made me see a little bit like, I really don't. You shouldn't need like a woman to take care of you. You should be able to take care of yourself. It's nice to have one on your side and everything, but you should be able to like learn how to do things on your own and stuff like that. So you shouldn't have to rely on somebody to be.
So, what was it like growing up with, the idea that you are male, or, you're supposed to be playing football, or, that people could disagree with how you live your life?
I don't know. It's kind of weird because, like, you kind of feel like it's a cult almost. Because you're like, oh, you're supposed to play football, or you're supposed to know about cars, or you're supposed to talk about women a certain way, or you're supposed to, like, treat women a certain way. And that never, like, even at a young age, that didn't really sit too right with me. Like, I never felt like I had to be, or like I wanted to be, like, just a stereotypical, like, jockey, whatever,
How do you feel that, your experience was, safer, or, more protected than those who don't identify as the gender that they were assigned to at birth?
I think a lot of people, unfortunately, are forced into roles that they don't want to be in, and that causes like gender identities and a lot of times body dysmorphia too and things like that. So I think I was lucky enough to have relatively like parents, on my dad's side, that kind of let me be for the most part, and so that kind of let me kind of figure out who I was and trying to figure out like the stuff that I was interested in and who I kind of wanted to be. But it does suck for people that don't have the opportunity to have someone in their life that's able to tell them, like, you can kind of do what you want, but at the same time, like, know who you are and know what you don't want, and always be safe and look out and stuff like that too. But I think it's also definitely very difficult to not, like, have a support system for if you're trying to be something outside of the norm.
When was the first time you noticed or were friends with somebody transgender, agender, or, someone who just didn't, for example, when I was a kid, I would wear boy clothes to school.
Yeah.
So, just because it was comfortable, not because I wanted to be,
Yeah.
A boy.
Well, as a kid, you would hear, like, whenever I would see, like, movies or something where a man would dress up like a woman, or, like, vice versa, or, like, a man would act, like, feminine or something, that would be like, oh, that's gay, or oh, that's whatever, like, offensive term you want to use. And that just also made me uncomfortable, too, because I'm like, I don't really see anything wrong with it. I believe, like, as long as you're living your truth and not hurting anybody, like, no one should be bothering you.
Mm-hmm.
But also I understand, like, I also see a lot of people don't feel the same way. But, I don't know. I had a trans friend, a couple of trans friends in high school, and I think that's when I started to, like, I think I knew a little bit of it at the time, but I think I also wanted to, like, look up more into it and understand more into it, as opposed to try to be like, oh, well, that's not me, so I'm not going to get it, so let me just leave it alone. I think it's better to try to understand, like, where a person is coming from and understand, like, who they are and, like, what they're about and everything, as opposed to try to assign some judgment on them because they don't want to act or dress a certain way.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I knew a couple people that were transgender in high school, and at least the people that I was around seemed to, pick on them, and I always felt like an outside observer. I feel like I should have done more to make sure that person felt like protected or, safe, because everybody else, would make comments about,
Yeah.
what they were wearing or why are they wearing that, they look silly or something like that.
I had a trans friend, and high school, and they came out as trans male. And before that, they were starting to like officially transition. People would like, oh, so what do you want to be called? This or this? And then you could see that they were clearly like uncomfortable by outside people, like like really making fun of them and everything just because they had short hair and because they dressed a certain way and everything. And like people were calling him a lesbian and everything because he was with a girl, even though he presented him like he physically like looked as a woman but wasn't, you know. And I think they also had difficulties with that. But I remember one particular time, I was asking like, hey, you know, I've been hearing like people like refer to you as like your trans name. Do you prefer to be called your trans name, or do you prefer to be called your like the name that you were given? And I think we had like a little conversation, and eventually they were just like, okay, you know, I understand. Like, I process this information, but you know, you can call me by my trans name. Like, I am comfortable with that. And I think you have to ask people like, hey, like it's not hard to ask someone like what pronouns they prefer, or what, you know, what name do you prefer to go by. It's just that's that, like, you
And
know.
some people don't even, you know, people who are, you know, misogynistic or bigoted, you
Yeah.
know, they just don't even see that.
Yeah.
They don't have the, you know, empathy to even ask those type of questions, or like it just doesn't make sense to them because they're like stuck in their own world. Their like worldview is so
Yeah.
narrow to their perception of life that they don't even think to ask those questions. So the first thing they do is judge.
I think, at least for me speaking, I think as a person of color, I kind of learned at a young age that like a lot of times you are kind of forced upon something that you really can't control. And from that perspective, you really, at least for me, you understand people that are in a position to where like I'm stuck, like I may be presented as this, but I'm not this type of person, or I may like dress this way, but I am this type of person. And I've learned to like accept people for like who they want to be and who they are, as opposed to trying to like assign them to what like my idea of a person is.
I feel like in the U.S., like here, we are a lot more open than other countries. Like, what country? I could be wrong. Russia was, you know, sending out messages to kill your gay sons, or
Yeah.
we'll do it for you. How do you feel that the USA, you know, is more open to that compared to other cultures or countries?
I mean, we're not completely open. I will say that. I think with everything, at least for a lot of people, it takes time to adjust to things. Even though like trans people are not new, they have been here for a while. Even though people like to act like they're new, but needless to say, I think it's all about how people decide to handle things. And while America can be more progressive as opposed to other countries, there's still a lot of Americans that like there needs to be a lot more learning and everything. But I think with more people that are trying to understand and trying to make trans people and other people more comfortable, then like we'll be getting at a better place than we are now.
I agree too. I think the main point that, you know, is the central root of all, you know, the hate and everything is just ignorance.
Yeah.
And when like other countries like Russia, like for example, kill your gay sons, like they resort to violence because they're so ignorant and want to stick to their way of life that, you know, anything that challenges that, you know, needs to be not there. But how do you feel about how our culture in the United States treats women compared to men, or how men treat women, and how do you feel about that in other countries as well?
I think, well, this is clear. Women have been treated terribly for basically ever. Like, that's not even an exaggeration. Just open up literally any history book or turn on the news at any time. And I think there needs to be a lot more men willing to speak up for women, especially black women in particular, because like those are typically the most like disrespected and like hated on, and especially like don't even get me started on like trans women of color too. That's on a whole different list. But I think the men in this country, there's a long process of like power of a stronger power structure that a lot of them don't want to give up, and they start to see like, oh, these women rising up in the ranks and these people of color rising up in the ranks, they get like intimidated and they get scared or whatever the version of it is, and they try to like defy against it. But like, you're not doing anyone any better if you're trying to like stop someone that's trying to come up to your level, because like there's plenty of room at the top. So I don't know why like every man likes to act like it's just like my world and my like this to be run and everything. So
how do you feel about the president, Mr. Donald Trump?
is there
And how do you feel about, you know, his sexual assault and abuse and how he treats women in the media, and also pretty recently the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court nomination?
I think that kind of goes into the power structure of like evil men, because it's not too much of a surprise he won, because you look at his ideals and you look at how America has been running forever. It's kind of sad, but to be completely honest with you, it's not surprising. I think it's just more people are starting to become more like quote unquote woke to it, and it's nice to see. But at the same time, like it's unfortunate that men like Trump and men like Kavanaugh can keep rising to power, because there is still like a large number of people that are willing to be like either like complacent and everything, and also just to be like willing, like, oh, well, it's not my problem, so I don't have to do it, so I don't have to deal with it. Like, you know, it's like sometimes you have to take yourself out of your own shoes and try to see someone else's perspective. And I think a lot of white men in power don't want to do that, because that means having to see like how terrible you treat somebody else. And I'm sure Trump needs like a big reality check on like how he sees things, but that's probably never going to happen.
The only reality check he's probably going to get is like, that of a reality TV show.
Yeah, most likely.
So I agree. I think that, you know, the fact that they can just ignore that and appoint somebody to the Supreme Court with all these allegations just further, you know, promotes that culture.
It's because, like, white men in power, they're not going to want to give that up. And if they have the opportunity to elect somebody just as evil as they are, that, you know, why not? Because, you know, you have someone on your team that looks like you.
So, moving on, how do you feel like the United States could get better? How do you feel that, you know, socialization and family structures and individuals and themselves can do better to, you know, protect women, protect transgender, agender, anyone who feels different other than cisgender?
I think we need to stop, treating women like it's, like, they're the problem, when it's, like, historically white men have always been the problem. And for whatever reason, I'm not going to say this completely, but I do think that a lot of times you get to a certain point in your life where you can't really see the good in life, just because things have been going so bad. But hopefully, I believe that, you know, once we like actually start like genuinely caring about victims of sexual assault, and genuinely caring about the deaths of trans people and black women in particular, like then we'll probably get some progress. But I think if people keep trying to turn a blind eye to it, or keep trying to excuse like another unarmed black person being killed, or another trans person being killed, or keep trying to like make up for it.
Sexual assault.
Or sexual assault, exactly. Like, if people keep trying to, like, brush it off or act like it's not a big deal because at the end of the day, whatever, boys will be boys. That's not helping. That's really not helping anybody. And honestly, that's probably one of the most toxic things you could say to somebody. Like, but I think it's all about changing the behavior of a lot of like men in society. And I know a lot of men will sit and tell you like, oh, it's not the problem. We're not the problem. Da, 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 da. It's not the problem. But it's just like an overwhelming amount. That's too much. So it may not be quote unquote all men, but it's too damn many.
I agree. So, with that being said, how do you feel, where does that motivation for changing behavior come from? I think it comes from, the rage of the women that have been assaulted, or the rage of the families whose, brothers, husbands, family members have been killed. Like, so people who have not faced sexual assault, crime, any racial bias, gender bias, anything, they're so stuck in their world that until it happens to them, they won't do anything about it. They're just comfortable living their own life.
I will also say, like, even a lot of people that are from those worlds, like, there are some people of color that are, like, Republicans that obviously voted for Trump and everything. And I don't know what to say about that, to be honest with you. But I think a good, like, motivation is also to see, like, a lot of the people that are still trying to fight for, like, change and trying to fight for a difference. And people that aren't just trying to be, like, hug it up with Trump and everything and trying to, like, get the new press kit on, like, like, hanging out with Brett Kavanaugh or something like that. Like, it's not good for anybody for you to continue supporting abusers and then continue to like shame victims, because like aren't you tired of just having to, like, I know men are tired of seeing like oh, all these men coming out for like sexual assault, but no one's questioning the fact that like why are so many men coming out? Like, why does this keep happening? Why are we not doing anything about this? Why is this only coming out now after years? Like, and then people look at the victims like, oh, it's your fault. You should have said something earlier or da-da-da-da-da. But it's like, that's not even close to the issue. I think the fact that the issue is that you're sitting here trying to blame a victim. And I think once that's done with and we start like actually prosecuting these people for harming these other people and for like doing these injustices, then we'll see like some change. Hopefully.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, from the concepts of gender and how our society is molded around that, male or female, what would be your message to people who are uncertain about their orientation, or anyone who's cisgender, gender fluid? What is your stance? What is your message to people out there?
I think a lot of times in life you have to be introspective. Like, you have to see who you are as a person and see like what you like and see how you feel about certain things. And it's really all up to you, and no one can try to tell you how to live. No one can be like, okay, well, why are you wearing like black fingernail polish, or oh, why are you like dressed like this, or why are you talking like this? Like, no one should have the right to tell you like how you want to live. As long as you're not hurting somebody, as long as no one is in like physical danger, like, you should be fine. But I think for anyone that's like struggling, trying to come to terms with who they are and who they like and what they like, also research helps too. Like, finding a community of people that are just like you, or finding a people, or like looking up, like, maybe I could be this, or maybe I could be that, or just like
support groups.
Yeah, exactly. Or seeing what you're into and knowing who you are and finding people who have similar experiences as you. Like, because I think a lot of people don't realize that like just because you're different does not mean there are other people out there that aren't like different like you. So.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for participating in this
No
interview.
problem.
I enjoyed your insight.